I am Betty Michelle, and I am beyond excited to have you join me for my podcast, The Purpose Talk, your weekly dose of inspiration, biblical truths, practical guidance, and heartfelt conversations, empowering you to live a life of purpose, creating the life you've always dreamed of. Each week, you'll join me to embark on a journey towards discovering your purpose, truly uncovering the unique gifts and talents that define you, and gaining clarity on the direction your life is meant to take. We will embark on a journey towards pursuing your dream, following the passions that ignite your soul, and turning your aspirations into reality with unwavering determination. Taking bold steps to live out your true calling and transforming your intentions into impactful actions that lead you to a fulfilling and purpose-driven life. So join me every week on this journey to pursue purpose. It's one worth taking. Let's go. Hey, beautiful people. Welcome back to The Purpose Talk. I'm your host, Betty Michelle, and as always, I am so thankful to have you here with me today. Whether you're tuning in for the first time or you've been on this journey with me for a while, thank you for being a part of this amazing community of purpose-driven souls. I truly appreciate you. Now, before we dive into today's topic, I want to ask, have you downloaded the Balance Blueprint yet? Yes, I'm talking about that incredible 7-step guide that I put together to help you find balance in your life, especially if you're in a job season, where everything feels like it's being tested or you're going through a massive transformation. The Balance Blueprint is designed to give you actionable steps to regain control and balance, whether in your career, relationships, or personal journey. If you missed our last episode where I break this down, make sure you go back and listen so you don't miss it. Now, I know that you're here for today's message, so let's get into it. We've got an interesting topic lined up, turning failure into momentum, how setbacks shape success. Here's the big question we're tackling today. How can setbacks guide you towards fulfilling your life's purpose? You see, many of us are so afraid of failure that we stop in our tracks. But what if failure was the very thing pushing you towards your calling? Let's get into it. First things first, let's redefine failure. Most of us think of failure as the end of the road, like this is it, I failed, and now it's over. But what if I told you failure isn't an end, but a beginning? It's simply feedback. Failure tells you what didn't work and gives you the opportunity to recalibrate. I once heard someone say, failure is not the opposite of success. It's part of success. And I've learned over the years that this is an absolute truth. For the longest time, I thought of failure as an attack on my self-worth. I took every misstep personally, thinking, well, I failed, so I must not be good enough, or I must not be doing something right. Part of that statement is true, but part of this statement is absolutely not true. You see, my sense of value was tied so tightly to whether I succeeded or not, and it took me years to undo this mindset. I remember a season when I hit rock bottom. I was dealing with the fallout from some major personal and professional failures. But in that season, I learned one of the most profound lessons about failure. It's not the failure that defines you, it's how you respond to it. Because it's simple. Failure is a part of life, and failure is simple feedback. And when we face failure, this is where we have to learn to exercise faith over fear and how it comes into play. During my season, I started to pray through my failures, asking God to show me lessons in each one, to give me the strength to keep going even when things didn't make sense. Exercising faith isn't a one-time thing. It's something you have to do daily. It's like a muscle that strengthens over time. And trust me, the more you do it, the deeper your relationship with God becomes. You begin to understand that He's using every failure to shape you into your calling. It's really up to us to change our perspective on failure and think about how we can use failure as stepping stones towards success. And that is what I want to get into next. There's a quote by Oprah Winfrey that I love. Failure is another stepping stone to greatness. And boy, does Oprah know about overcoming failure. I'm often inspired by her story and want to share a little bit of it today. And it's not that I know her personally, oh, how I wish, but Oprah's journey is very influential, especially as we look at how failure and rejection are not final, but they're stepping stones towards success when you stay rooted in your purpose. And Oprah's journey is an example of this. It's no secret that early in her career, Oprah was told she wasn't fit for television. She was even demoted from her role as a news anchor. Stories tell us it was because of her emotional and empathetic approach that didn't fit the mold of traditional reporting. For some, that would have been the moment that we gave up, right? But if we look at Oprah's story, we learn that this is not the moment in which she gave up by letting someone else define her potential. It's the moment when she actually didn't give up or didn't give in to failure, and she continued to march towards her purpose. You see, Oprah stayed true to her passion for telling stories, connecting with people on a deeper level, and using her platform to inspire. What's remarkable about Oprah is her refusal to accept failure as the end of the story. She kept refining her vision, getting clearer on the impact she wanted to make in the world. Instead of shrinking in the face of rejection, she used it as fuel to keep going. She knew that she had a purpose that was bigger than any obstacle in front of her. And I would like to think that she knew if she stopped, she would never reach her full potential or she would never make the impact that she has today. And I don't know about you, but when she created the Oprah Winfrey Show, she found her true voice. And I personally am glad that she did. Her ability to empathize, to connect emotionally, and to share authentic stories became her strength. What others once saw as a weakness is now her strength. And today she is one of the most successful and influential women in the world and in television. Not because her path was free from failure, but because she refused to give up when rejection knocked at her door. When I'm inspired by famous people, I always try to pull lessons from their journeys. And here are the lessons that I've learned from Oprah. One, failure doesn't define your worth. Oprah's story teaches us that one person's rejection doesn't define your value or your potential. Two, passion fuels perseverance. Even when doors closed and people doubted her, Oprah's passion for her purpose kept her going. She knew deep down that she was meant for more, and she didn't let temporary setbacks derail her. In fact, it only made her more determined to find her true path. Three, refine, don't retreat. Oprah didn't quit when things didn't work out. Instead, she refined her approach, got better at her craft, and kept pushing forward. That refinement, facing failure, learning from it, and coming back stronger was a key part of her success. She turned every no into an opportunity to come back with a stronger yes. Oprah's story is a reminder that failure is not final. It's how you respond to failure that matters. Like Oprah, you can turn rejection and setbacks into fuel you need to keep pursuing your purpose with even more determination. So here's what I want you to do. The next time you fail at something, whether it's a job interview, a business venture, or even a personal goal, I want you to ask yourself, what can I learn from this? What is this failure trying to teach me? Because if we shift our mindsets in this way, failure stops being something to fear and starts to become something we embrace. Let me give you 6 ways to embrace failure. 1, reframe failure as a lesson, not a label. The first step is to shift your perspective from seeing failure as a personal shortcoming to viewing failure as a learning opportunity. Whenever you encounter failure, ask yourself, what can I learn from this? This simple question transforms failure from something shameful into something useful. It forces you to focus on the valuable lessons embedded in the experience instead of feeling defeated by the outcome. Here's practical action. After any perceived failure, journal about what happened and list at least 3 things you learned from the experience. This exercise turns your attention to growth, not loss. Number 2, detach your identity from the outcome. Many people tie their sense of worth to their success, believing that failure diminishes their value. But your worth isn't tied to what you do, it's in who you are. Shifting your mindset means learning to separate what happens from who you are. Just because you failed at something doesn't mean you are a failure. God sees you as wonderfully made, with value that goes beyond your accomplishments. Psalms 139:14 reminds us of that. Here's practical action for lesson number 2. Create a list of affirmations about your identity that is rooted in God's truth. For example, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. My worth is not defined by my successes or failures. Repeat these affirmations when you feel discouraged. Lesson number 3. Change the language you use around failure. Words have power. It's that simple. Words have power. And when we learn that the language we use when we talk about failure impacts how we perceive it, then we have to learn how to change that language. Instead of saying I failed, say this attempt didn't go as planned, but I can try again. This shift in language acknowledges the setback while still leaving room for growth and perseverance. Here's an actionable step that goes with this lesson. Next time you experience a failure, write down how you describe it, then rewrite it with growth-oriented language. For instance, instead of I didn't get the promotion, so I must not be good enough, say I didn't get the promotion, but now I know what areas I can improve on for the next opportunity. Lesson number 4, practice gratitude for the process. My friend, this is a lesson I am holding on to right now. You see, gratitude changes everything. When we fixate on the negative aspects of failure, we miss the bigger picture. Start by thanking God for the lessons learned and for the opportunities to grow. Every setback is a setup for something greater if you choose to see it that way. By focusing on gratitude, you can soften the emotional blow of failure and foster resilience. Practical action here, begin a daily gratitude practice where you thank God for the obstacles as much as the victories. Write down one thing you're grateful for about a failure you've experienced. This keeps you focused on growth. Lesson number 5, seek feedback, not perfection. Fear of failure often comes from a desire to be perfect, but perfection is an impossible goal. Instead, adopt a mindset that seeks feedback over perfection. When you face failure, ask for constructive feedback from others on how you can improve. This opens the door for collaboration, learning, and progress. Here's practical action for this step. After a failure, reach out to a mentor, colleague, or trusted friend and ask for feedback. Simply put, use their insights for growth and focus on your next step, not on perfection. And the last lesson here, pray for wisdom and strength in times of failure. When failure feels overwhelming, turn to God in prayer. Ask Him for wisdom to understand the lesson in your failure and the strength to move forward. James 1:5 tells us, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach. Leaning on God in times of failure not only strengthens your faith, but also opens the door to divine direction. In practical action here, develop a habit of praying when failure strikes. Ask God to reveal the lessons within the setback and for the courage to continue moving forward. This will help you stay grounded in your purpose. You see, my friend, when we incorporate these mindset shifts into our lives, it creates a new outlook on failure. You'll start to see that it's not something to fear or avoid. It's something to embrace, learn from, and grow through. As long as you keep responding to failure with faith, gratitude, and perseverance, you'll continue to move closer to your God-given purpose. And how do we do that? Let's take a deeper look into how faith plays a role in all of this. I'm reminded of Gideon's story in Judges 6. Gideon didn't think he was capable of leading the Israelites to victory. He doubted his ability and felt inadequate. But as always, God saw something in him that he didn't see in himself. Even after he failed on his journey, well, failed in his own eyes, that is, God used him to accomplish his purpose. Isn't that something? I mean, think about it. In your eyes, you see yourself as a failure and not capable of doing or being. Lens of Christ, you are more than capable of doing and being and will live out the purpose that God has planned for you. My God. When we experience failure, it reminds us of our limitations and our weaknesses. But that's exactly where God's power shines the most. 2 Corinthians 12:9 tells us, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Paul's words remind us that failure isn't something to be ashamed of. It's an opportunity for God's strength to show up in ways we didn't manage on our own. When we face failure, we often feel weak and inadequate. But it's in those moments that God's strength becomes most evident. And I don't know about you, but I know my God. And I know that if He gives me strength to do or carry out something, then it will be done. But here's the point that Paul makes. It is in our weakness that He shows up, that His strength is evident. So, my friend, you have to embrace weakness in order for God to do the thing that He set out to do in you. You have to fully surrender to failure and weakness for God to show up. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. I'll let you ponder on that thought. And while you do so, I want to highlight 5 ways God uses failure in our lives to bring us closer to purpose. 1, God uses failure to build our dependence on Him. When we experience failure, it humbles us and brings us to a place where we recognize our need for God. My friend, if you are in a season of failure or a season of setback and you have not beat down God's door, you have not beat down the gates of heaven to talk to God, I don't know what to tell you because it is simple. When we experience failure, it humbles us and it should bring us closer to God because it brings us to a place where we recognize our need for Him. So often we rely on our own strength, thinking that we have everything under control. But failure breaks that illusion, reminding us that apart from God, we can do nothing. That's John 15:5. Through our failures, God teaches us that true strength comes from relying on Him, not on our own abilities. Failure teaches us humility and dependence on God, drawing us closer to Him and strengthening our relationship with Him. In the story of Peter, he was so confident in his own strength that he swore he'd never deny Jesus. Yet he failed spectacularly when he denied Christ 3 times. But in his failure, Peter learned to rely on God's strength instead of his own pride, which transformed him into a powerful leader in the early church. Our failures should draw us closer to God. So if you take nothing else from this point, please know that you should be knocking on the gates of heaven. You should be knocking on the gates on heaven's door, the gates or the door. However you get to Him, there is a direct line, and you should be getting yourself closer to God to understand and know the lessons that He is trying to teach you in these moments of failure. Number 2, God uses failure to refine our character. Failure is one of God's refining tools. Just like fire refines gold, God uses failure to burn away the impurities in our character. Pride, impatience, self-reliant, selfishness, and the list goes on because we're human. So we have some imperfections that we have to shed in order for God to do a good work in us. He helps us to leave behind a version of ourselves that we no longer need so that we can be closer to his image. He doesn't just want us to succeed in what we do. He wants us to grow in who we are. Failure forces us to examine our heart and invites us to develop patience, perseverance, and trust in God's timing. You see, every failure can refine our character and make us more like Christ, preparing us for greater responsibilities in God's kingdom. An example of this is Joseph. Joseph was thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, and unjustly imprisoned. Yet every failure and setback refined his character, shaping him into the man who saved Egypt and his own family from famine. Genesis 50:20, if you want to reference it. Through Joseph's failure, he learned patience, humility, and deep trust in God's plan. Failure refines character. That's it. Number 3, God uses failure to redirect our path. Sometimes we experience failure because we're headed in a direction that isn't aligned with God's plan for us. Failure acts like a divine U-turn, redirecting us to the path he wants us on. While it can be painful at the moment, failure is often God's way of closing one door so we can open another that leads us closer to his purpose for our lives. When we hit a dead end or experience failure, it might be God redirecting us to something greater that we cannot see. We have to simply surrender to God's plan and trust and know that his direction is the best direction. An example of this is Jonah. And I just want you all to know I am getting a true kick out of this episode and the content here because as a little girl, I would sit in church and listen to my uncle preach these great stories. So I really do get joy from bringing these stories to life and helping people to use them in real time. Jonah always made me giggle in church. I just could not believe like he went through all of these things. Okay, I'm focused. Jonah tried to flee from God's calling, but after failing to run away and being swallowed by a great fish, God redirects his path. That failure led Jonah back to the mission God had called him to all along, preaching repentance to Nineveh. God uses failure to redirect our path. And if you know how life gets in the way, you know that there's a constant battle in your mind of do I go left? Do I go right? Do I keep forward? I dare not backtrack, right? The whirlwind. But I'm here to tell you, if you just take time to ask God what direction he wants you to go in, he will direct your path. And I encourage you to do it proactively because anytime we do not include God in the plan ahead of time before we go marching towards something, he stops us in our track and redirects our path. And oftentimes it shows up as failure. So the choice is yours, my friend. Invite him in proactively or he'll swoop in anyway and redirect your path. Number 4, God uses failure to teach us perseverance. Perseverance is a powerful spiritual muscle, and failure is often the weight that helps us build it. God uses failure to teach us how to persevere in our faith and trust him through difficulties. Failure shows us that setbacks are not the end of the story. In fact, God often used them as stepping stones towards the breakthrough he has planned. You see, failure teaches us how to endure, helping us to keep going even when the road is hard, knowing that God's grace will sustain us. Consider Paul. He faced numerous failures and hardships, imprisonment, shipwrecked, beaten, and rejected, but he never gave up. Through it all, he learned perseverance, trusting that God's grace was sufficient for him even in his weakness. 2 Corinthians 12:9. God's grace is what carries us, my friend. That's it, and that's all. God's grace is sufficient, enough for us to keep marching towards our purpose. And when we learn that failure teaches us perseverance and it teaches us how to build the muscle to just simply keep going, to simply keep saying yes to God, to simply keep marching towards obedience, we'll learn that His grace fills us up with everything that we need to keep going. And lastly, God uses failure to prepare us for greater success. Sometimes God allows us to experience failure because He's preparing us for something greater. The skills, the resilience, and the faith we develop through failure are necessary for the future He has planned for us. Each failure equips us with the wisdom, patience, and humility that we'll need to handle the greater success or responsibility He has in store. God uses failure to teach us the lessons we need for future success. Every closed door is preparing us for the open door that's aligned with His purpose for our lives. Think about my friend Moses. After failing when he tried to rescue the Israelites his own way, Exodus 2:11 through 15, he spends 40 years in the wilderness. When you think about the path that we choose not to follow, there are consequences. For Moses and the people, it was 40 years in the wilderness. That period of failure prepared him for the greater mission God had for him, leading an entire nation out of Egypt. His failure prepared him to become a more patient and humble leader. I don't know about you, but I do not even have 40 years to be in the wilderness. I don't have 40 years to not get it right. My consequence cannot be 40 years in the wilderness. I have to look at Moses and learn lessons from him and understand that in failure, the right now current failures that I am experiencing, God is preparing me for something more. I don't know, my friends. Do you have 40 years? I don't know if I can even handle the consequence of not getting it right. But here's the truth that I want you to walk away with from all of these lessons. God's purpose for you doesn't change because of failure. In fact, He uses failure to bring you closer to that purpose. Romans 8:28 tells us that all things work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to His purpose. Even your failures are working for your good, refining you for the mission He has for your life. Don't spend 40 years in the wilderness. Simply be obedient to the calling. So what did we learn today? Failure is not an end, it's feedback. It's a part of the journey towards success and purpose. The way we view failure and respond to it can either propel us forward or hold us back. The choice is yours. You can either let failure stop you or use it for your growth. Before we go, I want to remind you to send me any questions, thoughts, or stories to info@bettymichellemc.com. I absolutely love hearing from you. Don't forget to download the Balance Blueprint if you haven't already. It's packed with practical tips to help you find balance, especially if you're navigating a season of change or a season of failure. You see, I want you to take these lessons from those that have gone before us, so that they can propel you into the future that God has for you. A future that may have failure attached to it to teach you lessons along the way, so that you can live out the purpose that God has for your life. Until next time, remember this: you are not defined by your failures. You are determined by your ability to rise again and again, to grow and to keep pursuing your purpose. So my friend, keep going hard after what God has placed on your heart. I'm rooting for you, and I'll see you in the next episode. Until then, be blessed and be purposeful. I'm Betty Michelle, and I'm out.